When you see my mama coming, just thank Jesus and your family and wrap it up.
Myles McNutt, let's talk about the Emmys, which aired last night as we're recording this right now. It aired on Monday night, the 75th annual Emmys. And apparently, according to the Emmys, there was approximately 3 shows on television, which won a number of awards. Basically, Succession picked up 6 awards the evening of the Emmys. The Bear picked up 6 awards during the telecast, and Beef won 5 awards. And that was most of the night, what I just said, were those 3 shows. Last week, tonight won a couple of awards. And of course, there are other categories that also other shows won awards for, but that weren't broadcast at the 75th telecast. So those are the big stories, was like Succession, The Bear, and Beef. Those are the big ones. I will say that it was a weird broadcast because obviously the Emmys were supposed to air this fall, but they got delayed due to the strikes. And so they were honoring work that had aired or broadcast often a year ago, often like even more than a year ago, right?
I think The Bear in particular is really relevant in this circumstance because, like, this is the first season of The Bear that was nominated for the awards, which aired in the summer of 2022.
Yeah.
By definition. And so, like, particularly in the case of sort of Eben Moss-Bachrach, who won for supporting actor in a comedy series for his role as Richie. If you think about it, in the first season of that show, would you look at that character and that performance and say, that is the best supporting actor in a comedy series on television? You would not do that in a single world. However, when they were voting on these awards and nominating people and thinking about this, I guarantee you every single Emmy voter who voted for him was thinking about season 2 of The Bear, which is eligible at the next Emmy Awards. So I fully expect that man is going to win an Emmy for the same performance twice. Like 100%. He's going to win again, and it's just how that's going to be.
You're referring, of course, to like season 2 episode called called Forks, which was like really amazing episode that he was the star of. But yes, the fact that it's like kind of like a cheat code where during the voting period, a whole other performance is airing on TV that everyone's talking about and people are voting on. So it felt odd that we're honoring work that happened like 12 plus months ago. But other than that, I would say for an award show, it was an okay broadcast. Nothing went terribly wrong. It wasn't a disaster. It was fine. Myles McNutt, what did you think?
I agree with you on the broadcast. I think for the most part, for the weirdly, so like it was actually short. Like later in the broadcast, Anthony Anderson was clearly vamping for time at one point, recapping what took place. Like they were running a couple minutes short. There was a bit towards the end where Tracy Ellis Ross and Natasha Lyonne were doing the I Love Lucy chocolate factory bit. And you could tell like that bit could have gone for 10 seconds and instead it went for a full minute. And it's because they literally just didn't have time. And I'm like, it was very efficient. I think the big kind of piece of the broadcast part we're talking about is the reunions of various casts across TV history, which I thought generally never went on too long. I felt like each one kind of felt like it was well-paced and well-situated and was always part of a presentation. So it always felt like it was kind of keeping the award show moving forward. I think it was generally an amiable way to spend 3 hours, which is not always the case.
Absolutely.
When we're talking a major award show.
Could have been a lot worse. And yeah, they wanted to celebrate the 75th anniversary by saying, hey, look at all the TV that's happened in the last 75 years. Now, I do want to say that many of those reunions were tinged with sadness for me, personally, because most of the shows that were honored in those reunions, like Cheers and Martin and Grey's Anatomy and The Sopranos, are of shows that lasted longer than 5 seasons, which almost never happens right now because of the streaming environment and the way the financial incentives are built. You can count on maybe 2 hands the number of Netflix shows that have gone over 5 seasons. So it's like celebrating this time of past. Remember when everyone used to watch TV and TV used to be good and ran for many years and was a big part of our lives? Not really that much anymore. You know, like it's celebrating this moment that's passed. Patrick Klepek, you're not typically a fan of these award shows, you know, but you checked out significant parts of the program last night. Curious, what was your reaction?
Usually my interaction with the Emmys is having to set up an iPad so that my wife can watch all of the red carpet stuff while she is on her phone, furiously texting back and forth in a group chat as they. I mean, judging might not be the wrong word to use, but that is usually it is like making sure that she has her set up so that she can do that for. I mean, she does it like the Golden Globes, the Emmys, like that. That's like her big moment with a bunch of her friends is to watch all that stuff. But what I thought was really interesting about your point, David, is if you try to imagine doing the recreation, like getting groups back together, get cast back together, very common. We see this happen in all sorts of different types of award shows.
Oscars, Golden Globes, it happens, yeah.
If you try to imagine what would it do 30 years from now, right? What are the shows that would even, like, they still have eras to go through, right? Like Game of Thrones, you could do it. The Office, Parks and like there are still eras ahead of what they're celebrating that fit that traditional TV format where a show becomes part of your life, where it be like these characters are central to how you think about how you spend your time and you form emotional bonds. The kinds of shows that qualify for that these days are really rare. Like Stranger Things, probably, you know what I mean? Like is one that maybe meets that
Stranger
moment.
Things and Succession, maybe, but like Succession, not even close to a phenomenon as any of the other shows that were mentioned.
Stranger Things is a pop culture hit to the degree that you would know who these people were and they would grow up. Like you could envision that. Succession is a critical darling. Nobody watched that show. I mean, people watch that show, but like in the grand scheme of things,
single-digit millions of people watched it. Yeah,
right, right. And so I think it comes at a very interesting inflection point in not only to your point about how long shows are on, the relationship we have with those shows in our lives, but then peak TV as a concept is sort of crumbling before our eyes as the consolidation happens in streaming, in television production. It just makes me wonder, what are you celebrating in, like, television will continue to be around, but the format in which we indulge in it, we consume it, we memorialize it, I think all of that is fundamentally shifting, even if we won't feel it for, a decade from now.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Changing the topic slightly, Myles, one of the things that has been brought up, that I've already brought up, is how few shows were honored during the evening. This is a constant problem. Alan Sepinwall wrote about it at Rolling Stone and how there's not very many solutions to it. Like, you could increase the number of categories. So there's drama and there's comedy, and maybe you could say dramedy category. Like you could increase the number of like overall categories people could submit things for, or you could force people to watch the shows, like watch more shows. But like that's difficult to do. So the problem is there's so many shows that are so good, and then every year at the Emmys, only 3 are honored, or like 4 are honored in any significant way. And it makes for a boring telecast as well, right?
Yeah,
so,
I mean, like, and so I did go back and I was trying to figure out, because people were talking about how, like, is this new or not? And it's like, obviously, in previous years, we've seen shows like The Crown completely swept categories in year succession, was not eligible in the drama categories. And they're like, well, what else are we going to do? Moreover, Schitt's Creek swept the field, right? In all of its categories. In its final year, sort of this coronation was sort of like, wait, we didn't pay any attention to you for a long time, and now you're important because you went to Netflix. But like, these are the things that happen, right? But like, we have never had a year where 3 shows in all 3 categories have done what these shows did, which is sweep writing, directing, series, as well as at least 2 acting awards, right? And like, none swept the field entirely. Succession lost supporting actress, and Beef didn't win either of the supporting awards, and The Bear wasn't nominated in lead actress this year because they were still playing the categories for the first season. But like, realistically, like, still, it felt like they only watched 1 show in each category, and for it to be that across the board. In past years, we've seen splits in those areas. Like, you might be thinking, oh, well, did the Queen's Gambit or those types of things. But like, those years, there were kind of other shows they gravitated towards, performances that stood out, leads that, but like, there was just none of that this time. And I think the frustrating part of it is that, like, none of these shows are bad. Like, we can't be too mad about it. Like, it's not like we can be like, oh, that's the most boring thing they could have done. It's like, well, look, Succession, widely considered to be a great show. And also the fact that, like, you know, Snook and Culkin had never won Emmys before in those categories. So it's not as though like they were just rewarding the same people over and again, right? This is the Bears' first time. We can't be mad about it, even though it's just going to do the same thing next year.
But we want to be so mad about.
But we want to be, and like same thing with Beef, where it's just sort of like that's a fundamentally good show with 2 great lead performances. I think I would have been a bit annoyed, even though I don't really care that much about the people who won the awards, if they had won the supporting awards for roles that I didn't think were as substantial as the leads were. But ultimately, it's like, these are not like bad examples. This is not the Emmys treading in this like really boring water. It's just that
it's not like they nominated Obi-Wan or anything like that.
Do not get me started about what is by far and away the dumbest possible nomination I can think of. But like, I think at the end of the day, you start to realize like, okay, if we're not mad at the Emmys for like doing the boring thing, we're mad at them for just, they didn't watch enough stuff. They didn't think about these performances in context. They didn't like grapple with those things. But to your point, you cannot force the Emmy voters to do anything. The time where like they created blue ribbon panels that had to watch episodes of all the people that were nominated and use that to build nominations was the year they nominated Kevin James for King of Queens. So we know that system doesn't work because it's just like, these are not the systems that we need. This is not the solution that we have. We're stuck in a scenario where it's just like the response to peak TV from Emmy voters has been to narrow their sort of pathway of what they consider to be great and just kind of be like, it's easier. Why am I going to go try to do everything and make it from there? And so I think we have to ask ourselves some serious questions about, is this a matter of like trying to revitalize the Emmys, or should we just like stop pretending that it matters, right? To just sort of accept that like realistically we're never going to win this. Let's just accept it as the nomination is the victory, the chance for recognition is where it comes from, and as long as they're awarding good shows, can we really justify complaining about it?
Well, yeah, and the broader question is, what is the function of an award ceremony and telecast like the Emmys in today's day and age? I posted on Threads last night how I thought the broadcast went okay. It was very unobjectionable, right? There's so many years where we watch a broadcast and we think that was a travesty, and this one was not. It was completely adequate. There were like very efficient, very occasional humor, handful of great speeches. But I also said, hey, I wonder like what Gen Z thinks of Ally McBeal's tribute and the Cheers tribute and stuff. And somebody responded with something that I thought was very astute, which is, I don't think younger people watch award shows, right? And I think certainly a lot of the TikTokers I watch award shows, but like I think there's many people coming up in the next generation for whom shows like this are just completely irrelevant. And I don't see them doing anything to try and change that, right? Award shows basically continue to have, like, so Golden Globes last week or a couple weeks ago, Emmys, probably the Oscars this year, they continue to just have the same format. And that format, I think a lot of people who are younger find pretty uninteresting. Patrick Klepek on here, I want to hear from both of you about this, but Patrick, what do you think about that? And Myles, curious about you think about that as well.
Well, I think it's a measure of format, right? Like, a lot of people point towards something like in the space I work in, like the Game Awards, is like, do you just go full commercialization? Do you just turn this into sort of a trailer factory for what comes next? And then the awards are kind of sandwiched in between. I've covered Game Awards.
Say what you will about the tenets of the Game Awards, Patrick Klepek, but at least it's an ethos, is what I would say about that, And
that ethos sucks, but like it is one. Like this year's Game Awards was the most miserable package they've put together yet in trying to.
Yeah.
Well, saying they tried to balance the commercial and the artistic would be, I think, a very generous interpretation of how the Game Awards were packaged this year. But that's just putting sugar in, like, that's just giving the audience a sugar rush. I don't know that it necessarily fundamentally changes the dynamic at the heart of, because with the Game Awards, they're called the Game Awards, but they're trailers. You're there for trailers and awards happen to be there. And so I don't know that the solution to the Emmys or the Oscars or any of these is necessarily like looking forward to stuff that you might be interested in. I think in many ways this speaks to just sort of like the fact that entertainment has become so scattered. Like, we don't just sit down to watch TV. We don't just sit down to like go see a movie. Like, all of entertainment has become this just sort of like really blurry line of like where we spend our time. And it speaks to peak TV. It speaks to the rise of video games. Just people's interests is just scattered. And how many people, lots of people watch, probably lots of Gen Z watches TV, but do they just love the medium of television so much that they want to see it rewarded?
Right.
Probably
Or
not.
do they not even think about it in those terms at all, right?
Correct. It's just, it's
right.
you know, I always feel like when I look at my kid interact with their iPad, it's like, she doesn't really have video game time. She might do a video game for 10 minutes and then bounces to something else. It's just, they have a fundamental different relationship with entertainment. And I think that tension is then reflected increasingly over time with these award shows that are like hyper targeted, like, but you watched movies this year. And I just think younger audiences don't think of their entertainment time in the same way.
Right. Whereas
Yeah.
these award shows were created in an earlier era when the arrival of the television set was a massive technological game changer, you know? So yeah, I think there's a lot to that. Myles McNutt, what do you think about just the basic concept of award shows in general these
Right.
days?
I've put a lot of thought into this academically. And like, I remember I asked some of my students at one point, because I was just like, because every time an award show happens, like I'll walk to class in an hour from now and just to be like, hey, who watched the Emmys last night? And it's a joke. Like, it's fully a joke, right? I know for a fact that none of them watched the Emmys. There's like 36 of them, and the chances of one having done so is incredibly slim.
And these are people who have Myles as a professor and who have dedicated their lives to studying media in some capacity.
Now, mind
right?
you, they've been in this class for a week, so like they haven't yet been fully acclimated. But like one of the things about that conversation that will be very clear to me is like, but I sort of asked once, it's like, so for the people who do, like a couple people was going on, and like one of them was just sort of like, I watch award shows because like, and this was an African American student, and they're just like, I want to see people like me be recognized, right? That the questions of diversity, the questions of inclusion were sort of front of mind to how they viewed award shows and the way they sort of understood them. And I was sort of like, that's an interesting answer to that question that reframes maybe how we think about what these award shows are, that they're a matter of visibility, right? That they're a matter of sort of creating this opportunity in those systems. But the thing is that like, there's, first of all, most of the time that's not what happens, right? We see cases like this year where Quinta Brunson's win, right? And the wins for Ali Wong and Stephen Yun, like we see some like meaningful diversity happening in these award categories, Ida DeBerry, et cetera. But like, some years it's just going to be a bunch of white people. So it's like, you're not going to get that every year from what you're looking at. But I think the important thing is like, I think the point Patrick makes about like, do people care about television? And it's just kind of like, the realistic point is that these award shows are for a group of people who grew up like this. Like David, you mentioned sort of like being like an older millennial, a lot of these nostalgia beats, like we understood the Ally McBeal segment, right? We knew why they were dancing. We knew why they were in a unisex bathroom. Like those things could be like cultural reference points we could have. Gen Z watching that surely was like, what the hell is going on with this particular case study? And I'm like, the reality of that is award shows are for an audience of people who are going to, like, it's going to die with us, like truly and fully, right? I don't think that our cultural understanding of award shows is at all going to pass down. There's nothing I can do to pass that on to a younger generation. Like, and this is why, look, award shows like the Emmys in particular. So the Emmys are operating a carousel between the broadcast networks. And realistically, this carousel goes through 2026. And more or less, I think all the broadcast networks wish they had not renewed this contract when they last did. I think they probably wouldn't have done it if they had realized how much ratings would erode and how much every single broadcast network would get absolutely no nominations beyond like Abbott Elementary, end of list, effectively.
That's a good
at this
point.
moment
I hadn't
in time,
thought about
right?
that.
So they are
It's
paying.
it's so humiliating. It's humiliating, basically.
They are basically paying to broadcast their obsolescence in a very fundamental way. And so when the carousel comes up, they have to ask that question, is this still worth it for us?
Right.
And the simple truth is it is worth it for exactly one broadcast network, and that is CBS. Why is it worth it to CBS? Because CBS has a captive audience, because their audience is old and their audience will just turn on CBS on a given night because that's the channel that they have an affinity towards. No other broadcast channel still has that audience. And that's why when the Emmys like cycle back to CBS, the ratings always pop up. And it's always like, is this a sea change in how people see the Emmys? No, it's that people just watch CBS by default. And surely this is going to be the lowest rated Emmys given the football competition that comes in January, given the fact that it was on Fox, which itself as a broadcast network tends to draw lower ratings, like
It was also on a Monday night, which is
it was
very
also
bizarre.
the
right?
move to Mondays is sort of a long-standing issue of like, where do you put this thing when you don't want to compete against actual television, because no one's going to choose this over actual TV. The long and short of it is that like we're talking about something that matters so little culturally and is kind of clearly disintegrating, and yet its value to the industry is higher than ever. The industry cares about it more than ever. Like, you don't think it matters to FX that they just won their first comedy or drama series award with The Bear, right? That wasn't a huge accomplishment in their feeling of position in the industry. You don't think Apple is really frustrated that all that money they sunk into all those shows led to just like a Paul Walter Hauser win in supporting actor and nothing for Ted Lasso, nothing for those types of programs. Like, you don't think Netflix and HBO aren't still in a cosmic battle over these respective categories and sort of how they can play that out. The industry continues to care about this. And so the question is like, where can they find a home that allows them to not matter to people, but where they can keep functioning and mattering to industry people?
How can we put it in like a nursing home equivalent of television where they can have their little fun and games, but that no one needs to watch them, basically?
Well, weirdly, you want it on a streaming service where you don't have to release any of the data, and
Right.
then it can just exist. The articles will happen. The broadcast, like ultimately, like what undermines a lot of this is the numbers are embarrassing. Like every year over year. But other than that, unless it's like the Golden Globes, where the actual production of the presentation is embarrassing, and that itself goes viral. Although maybe that's what you actually want, like these days, is just to have a disaster of a performance that makes people interested in it. But I mean, I think that is fundamentally it. But like, what are you going to do? Put it on? Just give it to Netflix and then like they broadcast?
For the record, the Screen Actors Guild Awards are heading to Netflix this year. They were on YouTube last year, but those used to be on cable, on TBS and TNT, and effectively they were like, this no longer matters to us. Like, why are we in this business? And so it was Netflix who stepped in, right? And it's kind of like, that's a huge test case for Netflix's ability to do live broadcasts, which that was gone great in the past. But also specifically their ability to just like use that as a value add for it to be something that invests those programs. But like, Netflix is so invested in award shows, it just makes sense, right? But we then take the Golden Globes, which went to CBS because, again, CBS viewers will watch anything. That's part of what that happened. But like, the Golden Globes still exist because they were purchased by Penske Media, because Penske Media owns all the Hollywood trades that get all their advertising revenue from for your consideration campaigns. So you're now dealing with the Hollywood trades running an award show with historical precedent to subsequently drum up an awards race and for your consideration campaign that then ultimately lines their pockets. So the industry is so much incentive to keep award shows alive, financially speaking, and in terms of prestige and those types of systems. It's just kind of like, at what point do they realize that this is like a closed circle, right? Like that there is no like actual audience for this content beyond this sort of like small cabal. And it's like, in cases like the Emmys and things like that, okay, you find a streaming service, you find a way to kind of make this happen, that's fine. But like the Oscars have exactly the same kind of challenge attached to them. And in that case, the TV deals are the only reason the Academy is able to function, right? Like, you have to ask yourselves, if you're the TV Academy and you're trying to run these awards, you're an operation. They have scholarship programs, right? They have philanthropy efforts. They have all these things that the TV Academy does. How do they keep functioning if they're not getting these broadcast rights coming in the same way, or if the streaming deals that come in fall apart and they don't kind of function? Like, the awards can still exist, but as an institution, are we going to sort of lose whatever other value these organizations do in Hollywood or in these cases? I've been to the TV Academy and been part of like a faculty fellowship they used to do, but they also have like internship programs for college students where they'll pair you with industry mentors and kind of facilitate those types of programs. All those things probably depend on the revenue the Emmys generates. And so I do think that there's some other dynamics happening around those that kind of stand out in that case.
For the record, SAG is going to air on Netflix. SAG Awards, I should say, will air on Netflix on February 24th. 2024. So we will see how well that goes. I tried tuning into 2 Netflix live events in the past. the Chris Rock special, which went fine, and the Love Is Blind reunion, which was a catastrophe. So I think it's fair to say they have a spotty record when it comes to live broadcasts, and we'll see how
at least
SAG
the SAG. I don't know that people are going to be trampling down the internet servers to get to that one.
That's true. That's true.
I feel like
how dare you?
It's like
how dare you,
Chris
Patrick
Rock, Love Is Blind, SAG Awards. I got that, but hopefully the engineers over there, they I don't know if they'll be sweating that day. As people click over.
Wow. Patrick, we're going to get a bunch of angry emails from the SAG people as a result of this comment. A couple of closing thoughts here. First of all, Myles, I like the idea of us needing to pass on generational knowledge of the award shows. You were saying how, it's going to die with us. And, no, Myles McNutt, we're going to be telling the kids, long ago, we used to stand on stages and give out envelopes to people, and they used to give long speeches full of names of people you didn't know. We can be the ones that pass on the oral history of the awards, is what I'm trying to say. All right. So it doesn't have to die with us. We can pass it on. But you're right. It makes absolutely no sense. It's ridiculous to pass something like that on. I want to bring up one last thing about this year's Emmys, which is the greatest disgrace of the Emmys this year, which is, I think we all know what I'm going to say. Better Call Saul, one of the greatest shows of our era.
Agreed.
Finished its run with 0 Emmy wins at all, after being nominated 53 times.
Infuriating.
A huge, huge bummer. Even at the Oscars, say what you will about the Oscars, but oftentimes, they'll Jamie Lee Curtis, okay? Like Jamie Lee Curtis won last year. She was awesome in Everything Everywhere All at Once, but was that really the best performance of that year?
No,
I don't think so, right?
no.
But they gave it to her because she it kind of often serves as a lifetime achievement award. Like, hey, you've been doing this for so long, we want to honor you in some way. The Emmys DGAF about any of that, apparently. It's like they don't even want to. Obviously, they thought it was good enough to nominate, but not good enough to win, which is a huge shame. Myles McNutt, any thoughts on that before we end today?
I mean, look, there's a long lineage. People always point to The Wire as a show that never won an Emmy. But here's the thing. The Wire was also never nominated for Emmys. That's an important distinction, right? That part of what's happening here is that in part because we expanded the categories and the nominees within them, right? We now have a larger number of nominees in every category, meaning that there's more sort of range to happen in those respects. And given that in the midst of this, that we kind of have shifted towards these kind of dynasty logics where we don't mix things around as much, et cetera. I think you're just dealing with a situation where you just got to accept that they liked it. They never loved it. They respected it, but never connected to it. Maybe the fact that it was a spinoff was held against it, right? That in some way they're like, we spent all that time rewarding Breaking Bad. This is just a derivative case of that. So we're not going to give it as much attention. I think at the end of the day, you sort of have to basically, again, we love to do this where it's like when the Emmys acknowledge something we love, right? Like where they pick up on a show where it's just like, yes, they finally understand, right? They're all there. They see what we see, they're on the right page. But then when they don't nominate things or they don't let things win, at that point we have to shift to the Emmys don't know what they're talking about. It's all a big popularity contest. They don't even watch the shows they're looking at. This is not an objective evaluation of anything that we care about in those respects. We just have to live with that. We just have to live with this truly depressing fact, with this truly unfortunate bit of trivia. But ultimately, when those situations pop up, just Emmys don't matter, Emmys don't matter, Emmys don't matter. You just gotta drill it through your head.
That is one thing I'm going to pass on. One day long ago, there was a show called Better Call Saul. And even though it was never honored by the Emmy voters, it was still brilliant. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.